Και τώρα ήρθε η ώρα να ακουστεί η φωνή του διεθνισμού απέναντι στα τύμπανα του πολέμου. Θα δώσουμε το λόγο στο γραμματέα του Μέρα25 Γιάννη Βαρουφάκη, που θα προλογίσει την εκδήλωση.
Καλησπέρα συνοδοιπόροι. Καλησπέρα Τζέρεμι, Λάουρα, Έτζε. Είναι μια καλή στιγμή αυτή να ξεφύγουμε από τις κανονικές διαδικασίες του συνεδρίου και να κάνουμε άλλη μια φορά με ένα διαφορετικό τρόπο πράξη το διεθνισμό μας. Σήμερα το πρωί, εκ μέρους της Προοδευτικής Διεθνούς, όπως είχαμε ανακοινώσει χθες το βράδυ, ο Τζέρεμι Κόρμπιν, η Έτζε Μέλκουραν και εγώ, εκ μέρους της Προοδευτικής Διεθνούς, του DM25 και του Μέρα25, καταθέσαμε στο τραπέζι της συζήτησης, στη διεθνή κοινή γνώμη, την διακήρυξη της Αθήνας. Τη διακήρυξη για τη σημασία που έχει η στήριξη των θυμάτων κάθε πολέμου, από τη μία μεριά, και βεβαίως η δημιουργία ενός νέου κινήματος αδεσμεύτων. Ο κύριος Πρωθυπουργός, ο Κυριάκος Μητσοτάκης, απάντησε με το δικό του τρόπο. Έστειλε ένα tweet, δεν ξέρω, το είδατε. Απάντησε. Εδώ είναι. Κυριάκος Μητσοτάκης. Εμείς δεν δηλώνουμε τάχα αδέσμευτοι για να δεσμευτούμε στο άγνωστο, είπε ο ποιητής. Το λέμε καθαρά. Είμαστε με τη συμμαχία της Δύσης. Ερχόμαστε από το διαφωτισμό και βαδίζουμε με τη δημοκρατία. Εννοούσε τη Νέα Δημοκρατία. Αυτό το ερχόμαστε, η συμμαχία της Δύσης που έρχεται από το διαφωτισμό. Όταν το ακούει ένας άνθρωπος από το Αφγανιστάν ή από το Ιράκ, ξέρετε τι κάνει. Κρύβεται κάτω από ένα τραπέζι, μπαίνει σε κάποιο καταφύγιο, γιατί ξέρει ότι θα τον βομβαρδίσουν. Ο Τζέρεμι Κόρμπιν σήμερα και εγώ χτες αναφερθήκαμε στη στιγνή δολοφονία της Σερίν Ακλέφ στην Παλαιστίνη. Δεν τους έφτανε αυτό. Δεν έφτανε στη συμμαχία της Δύσης που προέρχεται από το διαφωτισμό, σύμφωνα από τον κύριο Μητσοτάκη, η δολοφονία της. Είδατε σήμερα τις εικόνες του Ισραηλινού στρατού με την πλήρη στήριξη της συμμαχίας της Δύσης που έρχεται από το διαφωτισμό και πορεύεται με τη δημοκρατία, πώς βάναυσα επιτέθηκαν στους συγγενείς και στους συνοδοιπόρους της Σερίν, όταν έβγαινε το φέρετρό της από το νοσοκομείο, στους ώμους 4 συντρόφων της, επιτέθηκε ένοπλη αστυνομία, τους έσπασαν στο ξύλο, με αποτέλεσμα το φέρετρο της Σερίν να πέσει στο έδαφος. Τις επιτέθηκαν νεκροί. Αυτή είναι η συμμαχία της Δύσης που έρχεται από το διαφωτισμό και βαδίζει με τη Νέα Δημοκρατία, κύριε Κυριάκο Μητσοτάκη. Η λέξη διαφωτισμός, μαζί με την ιδέα αυτής της ιεράς συμμαχίας, κύριε Μητσοτάκη, συνειδητοποιείτε ότι ο ναζισμός βγήκε από τη Δύση. Δεν βγήκε μόνο ο Ρουσό, δεν βγήκε μόνο ο Βολτέρος, δεν βγήκε μόνο ο Λάιπνιτς, δεν βγήκε μόνο ο Χέγκελ, βγήκε και ο Χίτλερ από τη Δύση. Το ερώτημα δεν είναι αν είμαστε στη Δύση. Το ερώτημα είναι πώς διαχειριζόμαστε εμείς την παράδοση της Δύσης, η οποία είναι μια παράδοση ταυτόχρονα σπουδαίων πραγμάτων, όπως ο διαφωτισμός, αλλά και της χειρότερης αποικιοκρατίας, του νασισμού, του φασισμού, των χημικών όπλων, όλων αυτών τα οποία έχουν κάνει τους ανθρώπους μας, συνανθρώπους μας στην Αφρική, στο Αφγανιστάν, στο Πακιστάν, στο Ισραήλ, στην Παλαιστίνη, στην Ιεμένη. Άλλη μια περίπτωση όπου ο διαφωτισμός χέρι-χέρι με τη δημοκρατία κατακρεουργεί ανθρώπινες ζωές. Το να είμαστε αδέσμευτοι από το βαρβαρισμό είναι κομμάτι αναπόσπαστο του διαφωτισμού, κύριε Μητσοτάκη. Το Μέρα25, η Προοδευτική Διεθνής, το DM25, είμαστε εδώ για να δείξουμε τι σημαίνει να διασώσεις από την παράδοση της Δύσης το φως του διαφωτισμού και να καταδικάσεις μία για πάντα τη βαρβαρότητα, τον ιμπεριαλισμό, την αποικιοκρατία που προέκυψε και αυτή από τη Δύση, από αυτή την Ευρώπη. Εμείς είμαστε στη Δύση, είμαστε και στην Ανατολή, είμαστε και στο Βορρά, είμαστε και στο Νότο. Αυτό σημαίνει να είσαι διεθνιστής. Και δεν υπάρχει καλύτερος τρόπος για να προχωρήσουμε αυτή τη συζήτηση από το να μας συστήσω στην πολύ σπουδαία συντρόφισσα, συνοδοιπόρο, φίλη, τη Σμυρνιά από τη Σμύρνη της Τουρκίας, την Έτζε του Μολκουράν. Η Έτζε δύο κουβέντες για την Έτζε, θα μπορούσα να μιλάω όλο το βράδυ. Η Έτζε προέρχεται από τη Σμύρνη με νομικές σπουδές, δημοσιογράφος, αρθρογραφούσε στη Μιλιέτ και στην Χάμπερτουρκ, από όπου απελήθη, γιατί δεν συνεμορφώθην προς τις υποδείξεις του καθεστώτος. Το αποτέλεσμα ήταν η Έτζε σήμερα ζει στο Αμβούργο, φυγάς από την Τουρκία του Ερντογάν, συγγραφέας σπουδαίων βιβλίων. Ένα από τα βιβλία της, ήταν το πρώτο που διάβασα, πρέπει να πω έτσι, είχε τον τίτλο «Πώς να χάσεις μία χώρα». How to lose a country. Ήταν η δική της εμπειρία του πώς λίγο-λίγο, σαν το βατράχι που είναι στην κατσαρόλα, που ζεσταίνεται και πριν το καταλάβει βράζει, λίγο-λίγο ένα καθεστώς μπορεί από εκεί που ήταν ημιδημοκρατικό να καταλήξει να είναι απολυταρχικό, να είναι μια δικτατορία. Διαβάζοντας το βιβλίο της Έτζε, κάτι το οποίο έκανα επί καθεστώς Μητσοτάκης ΑΕ, ήταν σαν να βλέπω ένα ντοκιμαντέρ αυτού που συνέβαινε στη χώρα μας. Όταν σηκώθηκα στη Βουλή και μίλησα για ερντογανισμό του κυρίου Μητσοτάκη, ήμουν επηρεασμένος από το βιβλίο της Έτζε. Από τότε έγραψε και ένα άλλο βιβλίο, με έναν τίτλο συναρπαστικό για την εποχή μας, «Μαζί», «Together». Ο Μπράιαν Ίνο, καλός μας φίλος, έγραψε ένα μικρό τσιτάτο στο βιβλίο. Αν υπήρχε, λέει, ένα βιβλίο που θα ήθελα να διαβάσουν όλοι, όλων των ηλικιών, σε όλο τον κόσμο, θα ήταν το βιβλίο της Έτζε του Μολκουράν. Το ότι έχουμε την Έτζε σήμερα μαζί μας είναι μεγάλη προσωπική τιμή, είναι μεγάλη τιμή για το Μέρα25. Έτζε, come to the podium.
Hello, it's so good to be here. Thank you, Yannis. As Yannis said, I'm coming from close by, across the shore. I was born in Izmir, Smyrna, and I was raised there. And I learned the meaning of the word echo in the great Ephesus amphitheater. So this is how I grew up. That is why I know that for thousands of years, on the shores of this sea, Mare Nostrum, our ancestors looked at the waves and tried to find out the meaning of truth, the meaning of right, the meaning of beautiful. Mostly, the blood and the sparkles of the sea blended together. The good and the evil merging together. And among those who stared at Mediterranean, we are the descendants of those who decided that the North Star of humankind should be the determination to stand by the human dignity regardless of the price. Not only because it is the right thing to do, but also because it makes us beautiful. We are the descendants of those who choose above everything else standing together with friends for the dream of a just world. Many times, it wasn't because the final victory was certain, but there was this unmatched joy of standing for dignity. Also, there was the fact that the ruthless powers was too disgusting and too humiliating to side with. And once again, today, history asks us to make our stance clear. We have multiple crises at hand. Madmen abducted the political establishment all around the world. Refugees are pushed back to the sea to their death. Entire nations are fleeing for their lives. They are fleeing to the West. The starvation, and we know this for certain now, is here to stay. The sea is boiling and the air is burning. Fascism this time reappears not in military boots and with a sulking face, but with funny blonde hair and with an entitled grin. The banality of evil, which Hannah Arendt once mentioned, is now transformed into evil of banality. And most painful of it all is that we are every day asked to develop a numbness while watching these things happen. The world weighs heavy, and this is because the planet is about to give birth to the new. The old is long dead, and the birth will be happening sooner than we expected. Thus, the pain and all this discomposure. Amidst this madness, there are many who ask for hope, and I've met many people throughout the last years, all around Europe, United States, Australia, and several other places who ask for hope. As you can see, I have curly hair. So I was playing the role of Cassandra for the last 5 years, before the pandemic for 4 years. In 2016, I started talking to the Europeans, telling them right-wing populism, or now we call it fascism, I call it fascism, is not specific to those crazy countries like Italy, India, or Turkey. It is a global phenomenon, and it is coming for them too. In 2016, Trump was just elected, and Americans really believe that they can get rid of him in 1 year, and they wouldn't ever hear of him again. 2016, Britain voted for Brexit, and there were many, many people that really believed that Brexit wouldn't happen, even though it was voted for. French people did not think that Le Pen would be a serious rival to Macron. And people thought that we could get rid of Orban and several other right-wing populist fascist leaders with fascist intentions. I told them that democracy in its current form is dead. It is only the theatrics of itself. Because if there is no social justice, the fundamental promise of democracy is invalid. The fundamental contract of capitalism is in contradiction with the fundamental promise of democracy, which is equality. At the time, and there still are many people who think that we can get rid of this madness that we either call right-wing populism or fascism by just, fixing a few things, by supporting the centrist governments. No, it won't be like that, because fascism is embedded in this neoliberal system, and it's going to be more and more clear as the system crumbles, the real face of this understanding of the world and understanding of politics will become more and more apparent. I told several audiences about this fact, and I told them that this is a global phenomenon, this is a global problem. I was waiting for them, I was expecting them to ask me, so what do we do together? Because my reason to make all these speeches was to call them for solidarity, for international solidarity. But instead, what I got was this question. So where is hope? Hope is an inconsequential word. If there are among you who ask this question, I tell especially to them that hope is too fragile a word for our times. Because if I ask you this question, these two questions, you'll understand why I'm saying about these things about hope. What if there is hope? What would you do differently tomorrow? Or what if there is no hope? What would it change in your political actions there tomorrow? It doesn't really change anything. And this hope idea, and waiting for hope, and asking for hope, takes our agency away. It steals our agency as political actors. It turns us to a congregation of sheep that are waiting for light, a divine light. And also, we have to be careful about this hope. I'm sure you are people who are talking about politics to those who are not on the left, who are not supporting this party. And I'm sure that they are asking you for hope as well. So I am telling you to tell them, actually, that hope is already bought by free market economy. Take a walk on any commercial street in Europe. You're going to see ads with plastered smiles, with happy people saying that buy a t-shirt, change the world. Buy this and that, and you're going to become the hope. We are the hope, says many, many green energy moguls or multinational companies. Capitalism is already exploiting and capitalizing the anxiety of end times. And it is also producing gurus in TED speeches or several other places talking about the hope. Big business is recruiting young people with serious concerns, telling them that they are going to do good jobs, they're going to do responsible business, and that is where the hope is. Capitalism is trying to deceive us into believing that the system can fix itself without any rupture, without us. Greece, like any other Mediterranean country right now, just like Turkey, is very busy with itself. You have a lot on your plate. You are trying to survive every day, and there are refugees coming, and there is Mr. Mitsotakis, there is this and that. And my country, as you know, is struggling with a lot. When you're struggling with so many things, it might feel like international solidarity is an abstract concept. It doesn't help your daily life. But I do think that international solidarity gives you a solid reason to think that you're not alone. This is very important. But also, it is the logical thing to do. When I was talking about fascism being a global phenomenon, I wasn't philosophizing on it. It is in front of our eyes. They are in solidarity. Farage in solidarity with Putin, Trump. the others are coming together. They are getting on really well. They are in real solidarity. The ones who are not cooperating enough, I think, is us, the progressives of the world. Why is that so? Do you think we're not the hope? We're not hopeful enough? Let's say that there is no hope. There is no hope from this day on. And I'd say that we don't need hope. That's not our business. Our business is with the word determination and with the word faith. There is no hope. There is me, Yanis, Jeremy. Deal with it. There is you and me. But we are, and we will together be. Because believe me, you might not feel that you might feel that we are not many, but I tell you, we are enough. We are enough, and I believe in you. Thank you very much.
You're not escaping that easily.
All right.
Λοιπόν, θα πάρουμε 4 ερωτήσεις, 2 γυναίκες, 2 άντρες. Θα τις πάρουμε όλες μαζί, θα απαντήσει η Έτσε και θα συνεχίσουμε. Ποιες θέλετε να ρωτήσετε? Σύση, μόνο 4 γιατί πρέπει να προχωρήσουμε. Ξεκινάμε, όπως πάντα κάνουμε, με μία γυναίκα για να μπορεί να μιλήσει ένας άντρας.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία σας. Συγγνώμη, δεν ακούει νομίζω. Are you listening? Perhaps?
It's not working.
It's not working.
No,
Okay.
Again?
Μίλα αγγλικά.
Ναι, αλλά οι άλλοι άνθρωποι τα κάνουν. Okay.
I think so.
Δουλεύει τώρα.
Ελληνικά. Ωραία. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία σας. Σας άκουσα και το πρωί στη συνέντευξη τύπου. Okay, thank you so much for so...
Sorry, this is coming and going. Maybe we can change it. I'm so sorry. But I understood Efaristo Poli.
Φέρτε ένα άλλο.
Okay, στα ελληνικά. Ευχαριστώ για 8η φορά. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία σας. Okay, thank you so much for your interesting...
Sabotage.
Yeah. Ece, thank you so much for your very interesting speech. I was very lucky to hear you this morning during the press conference, and you really gave us much joy and hope. I have 2 interconnected questions to you. The first one is that you talked of solidarity, which is one of the most precious and important notion and words in the human vocabulary, as far as I know. In the past, solidarity was expressed on various occasions, such as, for example, with the Philhellenism during our struggle against the Ottoman Empire, okay? Then we had solidarity with the world, with the Democrats of Spain during the civil war in Spain. And then we had solidarity internationalism on the basis of the overthrow of capitalism. In other words, what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, is that solidarity has to have a common base. In other words, we cannot take either solidarity or hope outside the fight for a certain very specific cause. In the past, as I said, was, for example, the protection of the Spanish democracy against Franco's fascist regimes. Then we had the Second and the Third International, which had a point which was the overthrow of capitalism. To cut a long story short, and I won't tear up our comrades here, in my opinion, solidarity and hope have meaning only in connection with a specific demand. In my opinion, the demand is the overthrow of capitalism, neoliberal capitalism. I would like your comment on this. Thank you so much.
I think for the time being.
Shall we take the other questions as well?
Oh, yeah, sure,
Yeah?
sure.
Ένας κύριος, έλα, μιας και είσαι εδώ. Συνοδοιπόρος Κανελόπουλος.
Thank you. Again, what are you doing is very brave, and we thank you very much. I'm reading Nazim Hikmet's poetry back there, and there is a great
I hope somebody is taking a picture of me right now.
It's fantastic. So, in the Greek media, there is a widespread perception that Turkey is acting as a peacemaker, intermediate between Ukraine and Russia, while at the same time being an active NATO member state. I would like to ask you how the Turkish civil society is seeing the war in Ukraine.
Οκ. Πάμε τώρα σε μία γυναίκα. Μία γυναίκα, παρακαλώ. Ωραία.
Θα μου επιτρέψετε να ρωτήσω ελληνικά.
Μισό λεπτό. Edge, if you come out here, you'll be able to listen to this. This doesn't work beyond this line, the line of control. So, maybe,
Καλώς ήρθες. Ελπίδα και γυναίκες. Υπάρχει κοινή ελπίδα για τις γυναίκες? Ποιος είναι ο δρόμος? Είναι κοινά τα επίδικα για τις γυναίκες στην Τουρκία, με τις γυναίκες στην Ελλάδα, με τις γυναίκες στην Ευρώπη?
Thank you.
Οκ. Και μια τελευταία από μέλος του προβληματικού φίλου, άνδρα. Σήκωσε το χέρι, Σαράντους.
Καλησπέρα. Επειδή σε όσους προερχόμαστε από και ένα συγκεκριμένο χώρο, ο Ναζίμ Χικμέτ ήταν και μάθημα κάποτε, έτσι. Θυμάμαι κάτι άλλο που είχε πει ο Ναζίμ Χικμέτ. Η θέλησή μας τώρα τρανεύει, να είναι δική μας παντοτινά, να ζούμε ελεύθεροι σαν τα δέντρα του ίδιου δάσου, αδερφωμένα και αγκαλιαστά. Αυτό δεν αξίζει για να έχουμε μια ελπίδα να ξανακερδιθούν οι χώρες μας. Αυτό το όνειρο.
I'm going back to my podium.
Okay, I'll take your mic.
Let's start with solidarity. Jeremy in the morning was asking, didn't we learn anything from pandemic? Because he was emphasizing the fact that human instinct is towards solidarity, which I do believe as well. Fascism and neoliberalism think that we are selfish, self-centered, meek, horrible creatures. So in order to morally challenge neoliberalism, capitalism, and the entire cultural tentacles of the system and philosophical tentacles of the system, we have to have faith, we have to choose to have faith that humans are good in their essence. This is very, very important to me. Because all the other things, the ideology, politics, realpolitik, and whatnot, they all stem from this idea for me. Otherwise, it's nonsense. Why are we doing this anyway, if humans are not good, right? So, if I understood the question correctly, you were asking the solid target of solidarity today. I think it is not against something at the moment, but it is for something. And we have seen this during pandemic as well. It wasn't only a solidarity for survival, what happened during the pandemic, but actually people, without even knowing, began to form organizations that will help them survive when there is absolute lack of institutions. It was almost a trial, a practice, an experimental work to see how people can live without the establishment. You know, we are also dealing with the fact that there is this utmost non-challenge from the international organizations today, as our friend who talked about refugees put it excellently. So we are actually trying to build solidarity to bring about the new world. So it is not necessarily against something, it is for something. This has been going on since a while now. I do think that there is an overarching story from Seattle to Black Lives Matter and what we did during the pandemic to help each other. People are trying to form new political organisms, and they are trying to understand how these organisms should live, should act, and should speak. And each time, from Seattle to Black Lives Matter, and in between there's Tahrir, Gezi, Greece, Spain, and several other uprisings, they were occupying the places, and they were, for themselves, trying to see how they want to live in those spaces, how they want to interact, how they want to organize. They were, in fact, building miniature ideal lives, the better world, the another world that we have been talking about since Porto Alegre in 2003. So solidarity for something. And that is why maybe we are full of joy when we are building these miniature exemplary life forms, organisms throughout these political protests. Turkey, like Greece, has a very strong leftist tradition. Unfortunately, as we all know, there was this NGOization of the left, especially throughout 1980s and 1990s. And left, anyway, I'm not getting into that. So what I'm trying to say is civil society, the progressives in Turkey, how do they see war in Ukraine? As I told in the beginning, Turkey is in a really, dire state on several levels. So they are not even, they do not even have the time and space to think about Ukraine, other than how it will affect the natural gas bills. Of course, people are concerned. Of course, they are doing what they can. But seriously, the economic crisis in Turkey has reached a level where a middle class person who is earning proper money is dealing with starvation at this point. So it is really backbreaking, so to speak. And on top of it, there is the fact that we are really feeling like we're losing a country. We are losing a country bit by bit since 2002, actually. So unfortunately, and I understand that this is completely understandable, people do not really have any more energy to look at the world, I think. Despite this fact, but the most inspiring political action comes from women in Turkey. Well, I would say this if I was a man, if I were a man as well. And men admit this as well. Every 8th of March, they are still going on streets during the night and doing the night march. And it is not weekend leisure thing in Turkey. You can really get killed for that. And also, you don't have to go on a protest to get killed. In Turkey, every day, at least a woman is killed. And they are killed because the men can kill them and go unpunished. That is the only reason. Because as we know, misogyny is the wingman of fascism. Throughout the history, it was like that. Everywhere, it is like that today. So yes, global women movement is absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. And I think it is already happening. A dance against rape, against sexual assault in Chile changed the world, actually. It brought Chile a new government, but also it inspired the entire world of women. And they joined that dance. So there is actually a global women movement. And last, but not the least, to live like a forest, as friends, like trees, but to live on your feet, on your own. Nazım Hikmet would hate me for translating this poem like this. But when I was 8, my mother bought me a poetry notebook, and she wrote this poetry on the first page. And I was 8, and I thought poetry notebook is for poets, so I have to be a poet. So I became a poet, really. I didn't know that I have to recite poems in the notebook. So many of us here had the same destiny. We came from such families, we have those friends who suffered a lot, who had to give a lot to this movement. They suffered a lot just because they're leftists. And many of us might think that this life owes us because we paid too much a price for being on the left side, on the progressive side. But I think we should be happy with our lives, and we should be really happy that we're together here, because we're good people, and I think we're going to win. Thank you.
Συνδιάσκεψη του DiEM25 στην 9η Φεβρουαρίου του 2016 στο θέατρο Volksbühne του Βερολίνου.
Guten Abend Berlin. Guten Abend Deutschland. Guten Abend Europa. Guten Abend to all of you who are watching this live streaming, hoping that something good is beginning here tonight.
Εκεί γεννήθηκε το διεθνικό πανευρωπαϊκό μας κίνημα. Εκεί εμφανίστηκε ο συνοδοιπόρος μας που αφιέρωσε τη ζωή του στη διαφάνεια, στην αποκάλυψη εγκλημάτων πολέμου, εγκλημάτων εναντίον της ανθρωπότητας που έκαναν οι κυβερνήσεις μας πίσω από την πλάτη μας, δήθεν στο όνομά μας. Εμφανίστηκε όχι ζωντανά, αλλά μέσα από βιντεοσύνδεση.
Democracy is nothing without free speech. And the right to free speech counts for little without the right to know what our governments are doing on our behalf. Friends, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, Julian Assange is tonight with us from the Ecuadorian Embassy. Good evening, mate.
Thank you, Yanis.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Yanis. I'm very pleased to be here and to see this event. Yanis has spoken about the economic situation in Europe. How is it that Europe has become economically sclerotic? When it looks like a child to the United States or the IMF to provide some kind of leadership, when it can't solve its own economic problems. What kind of Europe, what kind of European structure puts in charge of negotiating the new economic regime that Europe and the United States is to share a new legal regime, which Europe and the United States is to share. Who puts that in the hand of a committed transatlanticist? That is not the good way to get a good deal. Europe will not have a good deal unless it acts, unless it manages to provide a dream that people can believe in and regain its coherency. So either we must face the realities of seizing the night and the day after, or we can act now and build this project, push for a new European constitution, and ultimately seize the day.
Let me just relate to you the one message that came out loud and clear in today's sessions earlier today. I will simply repeat it with no analysis. None is necessary. Free Julian Assange, amnesty for everyone who has fought for transparency, freedom for Chelsea Manning, and amnesty for Edward Snowden.
Δύσκολα αντέχεται η σκέψη ότι ακόμα τότε ο Τζούλιαν Ασάνζ ήταν φυλακισμένος. Είναι αβάσταχτο πως σήμερα, 6 χρόνια αργότερα, είναι καθοδόν σε μια αμερικανική φυλακή τύπου Γκουαντάναμο. Εμείς, που σταθήκαμε στο πλευρό του όλα αυτά τα χρόνια, από την αρχή, ορκιζόμαστε ότι θα συνεχίσουμε να παλεύουμε όσο ο Τζούλιαν Ασάνζ απελευθερωθεί. Το προαπαιτούμενο, ώστε όλες και όλοι μας να αναπνεύσουμε πιο ελεύθερα σε έναν κόσμο όπου η αποκάλυψη εγκλημάτων πολέμου οδηγεί σε εύσημα αντί να ποινικοποιείται. Απόψε, η σκέψη μας είναι με τον Τζούλιαν, τη σύντροφό του Στέλλα και τον πατέρα του Τζον.
So stiffen your upper lip. We are in the business of allowing unalloyed, unarmed truth to have the final word. Because we are in the business of creating the circumstances so that Julian's sentence will end neither with a bang nor with a whimper, but with a magnificent full stop. Thank you.
Πριν προχωρήσουμε στον επόμενο σπουδαίο συνοδοιπόρο που θα ανέβει στο βήμα, το Μέρα25 νιώθουμε την ανάγκη να τιμήσουμε όχι άλλο ένα πρόσωπο, αλλά μία μεγάλη ομάδα γυναικών που συλλογικά και ηρωικά απέδειξαν πως ο αγώνας ο καλός αξίζει όσο και να πηγαίνει κόντρα στο ρεύμα, στα συστημικά μέσα, στο στρατιοβιομηχανικό σύμπλεγμα, το οποίο εξαγοράζει τα μεγάλα κόμματα, συντηρητικά και δίθεν προοδευτικά. Ο λόγος για τις γυναίκες του Greenham Common, οι οποίες για χρόνια κατασκήνωναν μέσα στην παγωμένη λάσπη έξω από την Αμερικανονατοϊκή βάση στην Αγγλία, διαμαρτυρόμενες για τους πυρηνικούς πυράβλους μέσου βελληνικούς που τότε διασπέρνονταν στην Ευρώπη. Το Σεπτέμβρη του 1981, 36 γυναίκες αλυσοδέθηκαν στο φράχτη της βάσης. Το Δεκέμβρη του 1982, 30.000 γυναίκες έκαναν ανθρώπινη αλυσίδα γύρω από τη βάση. Την πρωτοχρονιά του 1983, μερικές από αυτές κατάφεραν να μπουν μέσα στη βάση και να χορέψουν πάνω στα πυρηνικά σιλό. Τον Απρίλιο του 1983, 70.000 γυναίκες έκαναν ανθρώπινη αλυσίδα μήκους 23 χιλιόμετρων. Έως το 1991, οι πυρηνικοί πύραυλοι είχαν απομακρυνθεί, οπότε και κέρδισαν το δικαίωμα να χτίσουν ένα μόνιμο μνημείο στον αγώνα για την ειρήνη. Ο Τζούλιαν και οι γυναίκες του Greenham Common απέδειξαν ένα πράγμα που δεν πρέπει να ξεχνάμε. Μόνο όσοι θέλουν να παραδοθούν απορρίπτουν τη συλλογική δύναμη ως αυταπάτη. Απέδειξαν ότι η αντίσταση δεν είναι ποτέ ματέη.
Και τώρα ήρθε η στιγμή που περιμέναμε. Η στιγμή που ο καλός σύντροφος και φίλος Τζέρεμι Κόρμπιν θα είναι μαζί μας να απευθύνει το λόγο στο συνέδριό μας. Ο Τζέρεμι απεδείχθη ένας φάρος ελπίδας. Ξέρω ότι η Έτζε έχει πρόβλημα με την έννοια της ελπίδας. You have a problem with the concept of hope, but he became a beacon of hope. Έγινε ένας φάρος ελπίδας για δύο λόγους, επίτρεψέ μου, Τζέρεμι, να πω. Ο πρώτος είναι γιατί απέδειξε ότι με ένα ριζοσπαστικό πρόγραμμα, με ευγένεια, με πολιτικό πολιτισμό, αλλά ταυτόχρονα με αξιοπρέπεια και χωρίς καμία διάθεση υποχώρησης, ανυποχώρητα, να πας κόντρα στα τοξικά μέσα μαζικής ενημέρωσης, να πας κόντρα σε όλο το σύστημα της ολιγαρχίας που δεν θέλει να ακουστεί η φωνή σου. Το 2017, υπό την ηγεσία του Τζέρεμι Κόρμπιν, παρά το γεγονός ότι οι δημοσκοπήσεις έδειχναν τραγικά ποσοστά, το Εργατικό Κόμμα, υπό την ηγεσία του Τζέρεμι Κόρμπιν, είχε το καλύτερο αποτέλεσμα από το 1945. Και ο δεύτερος λόγος που έγινε φάρος ελπίδας. Κατάφερε να αποδείξει ότι οι νέοι και οι νέες δεν είναι απαθείς. Και ότι δεν χρειάζονται έναν πολιτικό του σωλήνα, νέο, ωραίο ή νέα, ωραία, του lifestyle, για να βγούνε στην πολιτική. Ο Τζέρεμι, με το προφίλ που έχει, με τις ιδέες που κάποιοι θεώρησαν ότι είναι παλιωμοδίτικες, γιατί είναι παλιωμοδίτικες, όλες οι καλές ιδέες είναι παλιωμοδίτικες, ξεσήκωσε τη νεολαία της Βρετανίας. Εκατοντάδες χιλιάδες νέοι και νέες μπήκαν στο Εργατικό Κόμμα και ένα αρτηριοσκληρωτικό κόμμα έγινε το κόμμα της νεολαίας, που έπαψε όμως σήμερα να είναι. Τζέρεμι, δεν το θυμάσαι αυτό, αλλά το Σεπτέμβριο του 2015, λίγο μετά την εκλογή σου στην ηγεσία του Εργατικού Κόμματος, ο σύντροφός σου και φίλος μας, ο Τζον Μακντόναλντ, με προσκάλεσε σε μια ομιλία στο συνέδριο του TUC, της ΓΕΣΕ της Βρετανίας, καμία σχέση με τη δική μας ΓΕΣΕ, παρεμπιπτόντως, να κάνω μια ομιλία με θέμα τι έχει να διδάξει η εμπειρία της ελληνικής άνοιξης του 2015, τη νέα ηγεσία του Εργατικού Κόμματος, που ήταν τότε ο Τζέρεμι με τον Τζον Μακντόναλντ. Και τους είπα, μη φοβάστε ούτε τα τοξικά μέσα μαζικής αποβλάκωσης, ούτε τον εχθρό. Ο πραγματικός εχθρός είναι μέσα στις τάξεις μας. Είναι μέσα στα ίδια μας τα κόμματα, είναι μέσα στα ίδια μας τα κινήματα. Είναι αυτοί οι οποίοι φοβούνται πιο πολύ από όλους τη νεολαία που έρχεται για να βοηθήσει ένα ριζοσπαστικό πρόγραμμα σαν αυτό του Τζέρεμι και του Τζον. Φοβάστε τους Ράμσι Μακντόναλντ. Να μην φοβάστε τη Θάτσερ. Τη Θάτσερ μπορούμε να την κερδίσουμε. Το Ράμσι Μακντόναλντ μέσα στο δικό μας κόμμα δεν μπορούμε να το κερδίσουμε. Αλλά θα τελειώσω κλείνοντας, κλείσω τελειώνοντας, με αυτό που είπα την περασμένη βραδιά, χτες, πάλι, γιατί δεν υπάρχει πιθανότητα να σκεφτώ κάτι καλύτερο από αυτό που είχε πει ο μεγάλος Τόνι Μπεν. Δεν υπάρχει τελική νίκη, δεν υπάρχει τελική ήττα. Προχωράμε. Ο Τζέρεμι παραμένει φάρος ελπίδας, όχι μόνο στη Βρετανία, αλλά και παντού.
Kalispera Centrofia, thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you for this invitation to come to your conference and giving me some time to say a few words today. And I'm very impressed with all the different campaigns, causes, unions and community organizations that you've invited in to describe how they are changing things, how they're campaigning, and how they're changing people's minds. Because too often political parties think that the silo they occupied is clear and bright and beautiful, and anybody outside is a nuisance. They just need to hear what we're sending out. You need to hear the messages coming in as well. In fact, we don't need silos. We need big open spaces which we all occupy together. And to me, it's fascinating to be here in Athens, to be in Greece again. And the role played by some people from Britain and many other countries around the world in the heroic struggle for Greek independence from the Ottoman is something that I find fascinating to read. And there was no greater supporter of Greek independence than Lord Byron. Lord Byron was an eccentric. He alternated between being mega rich and desperately poor because he wasn't very good at managing money. And he wrote the most brilliant poetry. But what isn't always known is that the only time he ever spoke in the House of Lords, which was then the completely hereditary upper chamber of the British parliamentary system, he spoke up in support of a very desperate group of workers in Nottingham who were smashing up machines because the machines were being introduced by the employers and rendering a lot of workers unemployed because the machines took away the jobs of the workers. They were called the Luddites because they were allegedly standing in the way of progress. The Luddites were people defending their community, their jobs and their living standards, and they wanted a share in the wealth. They didn't want to be driven into further poverty and unemployment, and Lord Byron very bravely spoke up in their support. He finally died in Greece as part of your campaign for your independence, and he wrote much poetry, but one line I really like. He says, adversity is the first path to truth. Think about it. It's a very interesting thought he had there. And your strategies and campaigns and the way you defeated the Nazi occupation in the Second World War, the Civil War that followed, and then the desperate time of the colonels in charge in Greece. And then the assault on your public services and your living standards, the assault on so much in Greece, this time carried out by the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which then forced the privatization of so much of your public services. Our battles are social, our battles are economic, our battles are also an understanding of history. Socialism is the idea and the ideal by which we all live. And I think there are 4 points I'd make about socialism, if I may. Peace, justice, humanity, and our relationship to the natural world. Peace is not just the absence of war, but peace is something we have to always work for and strive for. What's happening now in the Ukraine is wrong by any stretch of the imagination under any way you care to measure it. The invasion is wrong, the occupation is wrong, the bombing is wrong, the killing is wrong, and the destruction of so much life of people in Ukraine. There can be no defense for it whatsoever. The statement we put forward today from the Progressive International, which I'm honoured to be a member of the Council of, made that very clear. All wars have to end at some point. All wars end with some kind of conference, negotiation, or process. Why, oh why, oh why did the UN take so long to even call for a ceasefire? Why have so many of the world's leaders been using the language of war and aggression when they should be using the language of demanding now a ceasefire to stop the killing and give some hope to the people of Ukraine and to the Russian soldiers that are also dying there? Because the longer it goes on, the more the deaths, the more the destruction, the more the hatred that would follow, and the economic and environmental consequences of this war go on. Food prices rising. Many across North Africa and the Middle East will be desperately hungry later this year when the wheat supplies don't arrive from Russia and the Ukraine to make their bread. And the prices will go up all over the world as a result of it. It needs serious intervention to bring about a ceasefire and bring about peace for the people of the Ukraine. There are many other wars going on, sadly. There are more than 40 different conflicts going on at the present time. Think of the decades of war in Yemen, the killing that's gone on in Yemen and the destruction of life that's gone on there. The war in Syria, the war in Libya, the terrible conflict in Iraq. All of these conflicts are fueled by the arms trade, and they all create massive numbers of victims. Occupation of one country by another creates occupation. The great Irish writer, James Connolly, great socialist, said, one country that occupies another cannot itself be free. And he was talking about Britain and Ireland. But the consequences of that occupation are devastating for people. And today, we mourn the death of Shireen Abu Akleh, a journalist from Al Jazeera, killed, shot in the head by Israeli occupying forces on the West Bank, where she was reporting on the lives of Palestinian people. She follows, sadly, many others that have been killed as a result of that occupation. And today, even at her funeral, the Israeli armed forces managed to disrupt the funeral, and even the coffin fell to the ground as a result of it. Today, our sympathies, our solidarity with her and her family, but also with the Palestinian people. The occupation must end. It cannot go on. It is not sustainable. So it's our solidarity with the victims of war. But when the fighting stops and the occupying forces have withdrawn, that is never the end of the story. Afghanistan, the occupation started in 2001, so far as the West were concerned. We formed the Stop the War Coalition in Britain in opposition to the occupation of Afghanistan, not Iraq, Afghanistan, which came before. 20 years later, 21 years later, they're withdrawn, the troops leave, and Afghanistan is now the most hungry, the most poorest, and the most repressive regime anywhere in the world. Hardly a testament to benign liberal intervention. It's been an absolute disaster as Afghan people try to seek safety somewhere else in the world in order to get away from it. It's always the world's poorest people in the poorest places that suffer as a result of war. Those that fled from Iraq and from many other conflicts around the world, they're victims of war. There are now 70 million people in the world who are refugees. That's more than the population of the United Kingdom. Think of it, 70 million people, refugees. Ordinary people trying to survive in a cruel and horrible world, trying to make their way and survive in the world. And it's the poorest countries that often carry the greatest demand for refugees. There's 1 million Rohingya people in Bangladesh at the present time. There are huge numbers in African countries neighbouring each other, as well as the huge numbers in camps in Libya and elsewhere. And there are then those that try to get to a place of safety. Those that die crossing the Mediterranean, those that die trying to get across the Channel from France to Britain, and those that are put into effectively prison camps when they arrive in different countries, as in the case of Europe, Frontex operates pushback. And I was very impressed with the speech made earlier about the legal action and other work being undertaken. We, part of the left, part of the socialist movement around the world, should never, ever indulge in the horrible xenophobic rhetoric against refugees. They are human beings, just like you, just like me, trying to survive in this world. They need the hand of friendship and support, not of condemnation and racism and violence against them. And that means that I absolutely support and welcome Ukrainian refugees who've arrived in my country and other countries, and I admire the support that's been given to them and the popular outpouring to try and help and sustain them. And indeed, I was talking to Ukrainian refugees last week in my own community in North London. But there are other refugees that don't get the right to work, don't get that kind of welcome, and end up living in desperation and poverty. We need decent, fair, reasonable treatment for all refugees, be they Ukraine, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Syria, or anywhere else in the world. And we also need, as Yanis has pointed out, in international politics, not just the immediate demand of the ceasefire in Ukraine, but also a different direction in our international thinking and strategy. Defense spending all around the world is going up. The US has just passed the biggest ever defense budget. NATO member states are being encouraged to go to 2% and above of their gross national income as part of defense expenditure. And when a conflict goes on, the arms manufacturers pressurize their government to spend more and buy more. And it doesn't matter what country you're in, they all do it. They do it in Russia, they do it in Europe, they do it in the USA. They all pressurize for it. The arms trade then becomes a pressure of itself for conflicts and wars. And so what we were talking about this morning at the conference that we did here in Athens was about looking to a future where you wind down the idea that military alliances bring peace, and you bring forward the idea that you cooperate together and you deal with the social, economic, and environmental problems that people face. And this summer, there's going to be a conference, very important conference in Vienna, of the start of the process to try and give real life to the global ban on nuclear weapons treaty, which has majority support in the UN General Assembly. The idea being that we get rid of nuclear weapons once and for all. They are no defense, they're only the ultimate weapon of mass destruction, and if ever used, millions will die on the first weapon, millions more on the second. We won't be able to count after that because we won't be around to know about it. We have to get rid of nuclear weapons altogether. The pandemic, the COVID pandemic, showed us just how unjust and unequal this world is. When the pandemic started, the World Health Organization quite rightly said they wanted universal free access to healthcare for everyone around the world. A very small number of countries actually have universal free access to healthcare. That pandemic exposed the poverty and inequality on this planet, exposed the way in which the poorest people are most susceptible to contagious diseases, and also exposed the good and the bad of humanity. The good were mutual aid groups, we call them in my country, others, where citizens come together to support each other, support those that are going through difficulties, and help people going through a mental health crisis, and set up food banks and food cooperatives to make sure people got through. And they were very effective, and there's a whole generation, the mutual aid generation, that will never forget that sense of solidarity that came from it. But the bad, the other side of it, was the grotesque profits made by big pharmaceutical companies as they overcharged for vaccine research, which was paid for by the public purse in country after country, and made massive profits out of this pandemic. If ever there was a case for public ownership of the manufacture of pharmaceutical medicines, it is the COVID pandemic around the world. That is a case, surely, for public ownership of them. And it's also led to falling living standards, and working class communities are considerably worse off as a result of it. And so we're now going through a renewed process of austerity being demanded by the world's financial institutions and being happily carried out by many countries around the world. At the same time, as there's more trillionaires than there's ever been, there's more billionaires than there's ever been, and there's more wealth being sucked into a small number of global corporations and super rich people than has ever been before. So on the back of the pandemic, when everyone else was scared and frightened about what was going to happen to them, some people were really coining the money in. And so I think the lessons for that are that we need socialism. We need that sharing of wealth and resources. We need those resources to be properly shared out. And we need an alternative economic system that brings that about. And that alternative is really what we have to put forward. You've experienced what the Troika did to you here in Greece. In other countries, it's called different things. But economic restructuring usually means bad news for the poorest people within our society. I was very impressed by the speech made yesterday by one of the people that came on behalf of the water workers and their union in Greece. Well, you've still got publicly owned water. Well done. Keep it that way. In Britain, we had a prime minister once called Margaret Thatcher. You may have heard of her. And she was a close friend of a president you may have heard of called Ronald Reagan. And they put forward this idea of Reaganomics, which was essentially you roll back the state, except for its military and policing functions, and you hand over all administration of all public services to the private sector. And water was amongst those that was privatised in Britain. So all those water systems that have been built up by usually Labour municipalities over many years were sold off to the private sector, to water companies at a low price. They did two things. They sold off all the land assets they could as quickly as they could. They got rid of as many staff as they could and brought in contractors to do the work on their behalf, and they made enormous profits. They've run the system so badly that in Britain, you've obviously all heard of Loch Ness, the place with the monster. It's the biggest loch in Scotland, the deepest and biggest volume of water in the UK. The equivalent of Loch Ness is filled every year by water that is wasted because of the pipes are kept in such a bad condition and leak. And last year, there were 400,000 discharges of raw sewage into rivers in Britain because of the mismanagement by the water companies, who also posted record profits at that time. So in Parliament this week, I said the way to get clean rivers, the way to get clean water, is to take it out of the hands of the profiteers and hand it into the hands of the public to run it democratically and accountably as it should be run. But the poverty that we have is also very serious. We now have in Britain more food banks than there are branches of McDonald's. So McDonald's is now second place in the supply chain of food to the food banks. And the people that are using food banks don't do it for fun. They do it out of desperation. They're not always homeless or always unemployed. They're people in work whose wages are insufficient to meet their demands, so they're having to access a food bank in order to survive. And so it is about what we do. Yes, we support food banks, of course. We support food cooperatives, of course we do. But we have to mobilize in the wage crisis that's there at the moment to demand a decent, reasonable, sensible minimum wage, not just in one country, but in all countries. And an end to the tax havens, tax evasion, and tax avoidance, which has cost us and the public services so badly in every country around the world. That is the kind of economic agenda and economic justice that we have to bring about. And it's a big battle. It's a big battle to get that message across because, as Etche was pointing out, the fundamental message of the right is always it's individual, you can do it on your own, you can always manage it on your own, but it might mean you've got to exploit somebody else. You've got to take the ladder away that you've climbed up to make sure nobody comes up behind you. Well, that's not very human and a not very decent way of doing things. And it does create massive levels of poverty, both within societies and at a global level. Look at the global gap between the richest and the poorest, as well as within our own countries. And so the alternatives have to be there. But our job is to build unity to do it. Socialism comes from a basic human instinct. The basic human instinct is that we are the keeper of the rest of our community. Community socialism is where a community comes together, often to try and defend maybe a hospital or a school that's closing or a service that's closing, but it can also be something that's demanding clean air, demanding clean water, demanding better and bigger schools, demanding more teachers, demanding better healthcare, demanding good quality, high-paid, skilled jobs for our young people to move into when they finish their training and their university course or whatever they've taken forward. But it is about what we on the left can do to bring unity forward to achieve this. Like many of you here, I was not just devastated, I was very angry at the first round result in the French presidential election, when Jean-Luc Mélenchon narrowly lost out to the fascist Le Pen. Why? Obviously because he didn't get as many votes as she did. Why didn't he? Because there was a split on the left in that campaign. Because the left were in several camps at the same time. We can't afford that luxury. We can't afford that luxury because we can't afford to have Le Pen being the voice of the French working class. And I'm delighted that there's been an agreement reached by all of the forces of the left in France now. For when the assembly elections take place, there'll be united ticket fighting for all of those assembly positions and constituencies. It's our job, surely, to support them and support them in that campaign. And also take that lesson wider across Europe and across other places, that yes, we have differences, yes, we have debates, yes, we have the intensity of it. But let's not put ourselves into silos and refuse ever to listen to anybody else. The fundamentals that we have to put forward are peace, are humanity, are a change in the economic system and economic circumstances. And whilst we're often told, and I got a question about this morning at the conference, well, you lost an election, so-and-so lost an election, Yanis isn't Prime Minister of Greece, and so on, and you're not Prime Minister of Britain. I know that very well. She doesn't need to tell me that. It's fine. But it was sort of like a council of despair. And then I look around the world and I see something very different. I see something very, very different indeed. I see communities organizing, fighting back, and winning. The heroic and magnificent campaign of the Indian farmers defeated the market objectives of their government to destroy their communities and their farming industry. The hope, and it is, sorry actually, hope is the word we can discuss. I'll see you later. The hope that's there now in many parts of Latin America. I was in Chile for the inauguration of President Boric. And I met people there who I hadn't seen for years. They were people that had come out of Chile in 1973 after the fascist coup, which killed Allende, 7,000 others, and drove thousands and thousands into exile. And I met these brave comrades that had come to Britain, had gone to Sweden, gone to other countries, and done huge work in opposition, and then eventually were able to go back. And they told me how it felt to be able to see a real change in Chile, a real change brought about by protest, and brought about by socialist ideas, and that hope, brought about by the hope inspired by great musicians like Victor Jara, or poets like Pablo Neruda. They brought about that sense of hope. And that sense of hope is there also in Bolivia, where the government, yes, was defeated by lawfare, and then they won the election. And we've got an election coming up in Colombia very soon. The election coming up in Colombia is going to be fascinating, important, because the idea that somebody of the left can become president of Colombia, unite the people of that country, that the wealth of Colombia can be shared amongst its people, not siphoned off by global big business to take it all away from the people of Colombia. And talking of people that have come back and fought back, Lula as president of Brazil and then placed in prison and then replaced by Dilma, who was then removed by another process of lawfare. And now the Workers' Party, with many other allies on the left, is fighting back. And we're all supporting Lula because we want to see that day when Lula is returned as president of Brazil, as an answer to those that offer nothing but depression and hope. And so this call for unity is something to me that is very, very important. Outside the hall here, when we come in, I think there's a wonderful exhibition there on the walls to the side, which is Global Voices for Julian Assange. And I was really pleased in the video that Yanis put on earlier, the message and the direct voice of Julian Assange. Julian Assange has told the truth about what the US was up to in Afghanistan, in Iraq, about Guantanamo Bay, and about their war planning, their gaming, and all the rest of it, and exposed the truth about so much. If he had been a journalist in Russia who had maneuvered himself over to the United States and told the world all about all kinds of secrets in Russia, he'd be a hero. He'd get anything he wanted. He'd get a congressional medal. He'd get the lot. Get everything. But Julian Assange told the truth about the complicity of our countries in the behavior of the US and others around the world and revealed the truth. He took refuge in the embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and is now in a maximum security prison. A maximum security prison for somebody who hasn't been convicted of anything. And if the British Home Secretary decides to send him to the USA, then she will be consigning him to 175 years of imprisonment in a maximum security prison. Julian Assange actually speaks for all of us. He is our voice of humanity. So do everything you can to support Julian Assange to prevent that removal. And it's very interesting that the media around the world seem a bit nervous about getting too involved in the campaign about Julian Assange. I say this to all of our friends in the media. There, but for the grace of God, go all of you. He has told the truth about things. That is what investigative, real journalism is about. It's designed and should be to make life uncomfortable for people in office and people in power. I know that. That's right. That's what democracy is about, challenging people. Julian challenged, so they put him in prison. Release Julian Assange. The last thing I want to say is about our relationship to our natural world. This might sound a bit wacky, and indeed, when I made these kind of remarks during the first leadership campaign I did for the Labour Party, a few people said, Jeremy, please, please, let's talk about bees and insects and flowers, please. I said, nah, I'm going to do it anyway. Why? Because the climate and environmental crisis has got to be addressed in a holistic way. Yes, it is about carbon dioxide emissions, which have the greenhouse effect of increasing global temperatures. It's also the levels of pollution, which get into the upper atmosphere and damage the air quality of all of us. It is also about the pollution of rivers and seas by plastic and chemical pollution. It is also about the destruction of the biodiversity of our lives, because we are part of a global species. We rely actually for our very existence on the totality of the natural world and the natural environment. And when I went to COP25 in Paris, I was actually quite encouraged. I was quite encouraged that all the countries of the world were there. I was quite encouraged by an awful lot that was said. And Naomi Klein and myself organised what we thought would be a small erudite seminar. We'd have a little chat with people. It was a bit difficult because there were 600 crammed into the room and about 500 more outside. But they were keen to hear a message and to be involved in things. And so it is about protecting and enhancing our biodiversity. COP26 in Glasgow was not a great success in the sense that the declarations were limited, there was an awful lot of greenwash, and there was a phenomenal amount of environmental lobbying, as Etche was pointing out, of people pretending to be suddenly very green. It's become a very big business to be green. But there was another COP going on. Our project, the Project for Peace and Justice, organised a week of alternative events in a theatre, Webster's Theatre, in Glasgow. And people came there and came together. What was fascinating was the huge numbers of people that came to Glasgow in hope of a better, more sustainable world were also confronted by the refuse workers, the bin collectors, strike in Glasgow at the same time. So there were piles of rubbish all over Glasgow. They joined forces with the unions of the refuse workers, and the refuse workers joined forces with them, A, to demand decent pay and conditions, and B, proper and better recycling, reusing and reduction of the waste that's there. There was a unity between the Glasgow working class who were working in those bins and the global environmental movement. It's that unity that will bring about real environmental justice. We're not going to get the end to climate change without system change of a world based on profit and exploitation of natural resources rather than the protection and development of an economy that can run on in a sustainable way. I know it sounds a big ask and complicated, but it's not really. Because when I was confronted with these issues and I wanted to see how I could develop my party's policy on it, Rebecca Long-Bailey and myself had a long discussion about it. She is Member of Parliament in Salford, just outside Manchester. And she said, Jeremy, any policy we put forward has got to be something I can honestly go to the doorstep of anybody in my community and say, this policy's for you, wherever you work. If you're in a polluting industry or whatever you're doing, it is a green industrial revolution we need. You get that by public investment. You get that by advanced technology. You get that by giving people a real stake in a greener, more sustainable world. It can be done, but it can't be done if we stick to the tired old free market economies of inequality, injustice, and built-in poverty to it. We are the green industrial revolution. That has to be the slogan of the left all over the world, because it's only the green industrial revolution that can save this planet. Socialism is about living with nature, is about understanding each other, is about solidarity. But it's also recognizing where our rights have come from. You go through the whole wonderful broad stream of history and you see those heroic struggles. Who ended the slave trade? Who ended slavery around the world? I was taught in school it was done by a very nice man who happened to be a Tory member of Parliament in Britain, but he was a very nice man, and he introduced a bill to end slavery, and that was the end of it. It's absolute nonsense. It's total tosh. It's rubbish. What happened was the slaves who had survived the Middle Passage and got from Africa to the Caribbean and North America were in revolt, in constant revolt. And the slave uprisings in Jamaica, which was then the wealthiest sugar-producing place in the entire planet, rose up and burnt the sugar crops and burnt the houses of the slave owners. They were brutally repressed and killed in their thousands as a result of it. But they carried on because they were not prepared to live in slavery or see their children live in slavery. That had the economic effect of frightening the owners in Britain. So eventually, slavery and the slave trade was abolished. It was brought about by their actions. I want our history teaching to show that and our history teaching to show the global contribution that's made to so much that we have. How was the right to vote won? Was it ever given by the ruling class? Was it given by the royal families and the aristocracy? No, it was won by people. How did women get the right to vote? In Britain, it was the militancy of the suffragettes that did it. It was the self-organisation of women that did it. It was Sylvia Pankhurst and working class women in the East End of London and other places that brought that about. It was the triumphant achievement of women themselves, just as was spoken earlier. It's women now who are standing up against the violence and misogyny against women in so many societies around the world. Socialism cannot exist without real equality and real equality of opportunity for everyone. And how was the Civil Rights Act ever passed in the United States? Because the derivation of slavery was awful, but the racism continued, the discrimination continued, the Jim Crow laws were there. The inbuilt discrimination against black people in the United States continued. But the marches from Selma to Alabama and all those people of the uprising against racism in the United States paid off, and eventually they got the Civil Rights Act. It is about our power and our pressure. So socialism comes within our communities. And so let's stop just being defensive and start being determinative and demanding of decent health, of decent schools, of decent jobs, of a society that gives security for all, that gives rights for all and protections for all. That means our work has to be education, our work has to be campaigning, but it also has to be motivational to young people. Young people are growing up in a world where there's the greatest ever level of consumerism, there's the greatest ever level of choice, and there's apparently the greatest ever source of information. You've only got to reach for your mobile phone, or I've left mine over there, but there you go, and you can actually find out almost any fact anywhere. What you probably don't realize is there's an algorithm telling you what you want to find out. There's an algorithm that's following your thought process and tells you what you want to know. I mean, I turn on my phone, and miraculously, within a second, comes up some news about Arsenal Football Club. Oh, I live near Arsenal, I support Arsenal, but it's not the only thing in my life. But the phone thinks it is, so it gives me this information whether I want it or not. Now, I can sort of bypass that and find something else. But take the technology and the genius of these algorithms a bit further, and then look at the success of Donald Trump, of Bolsonaro, of the right in Australia, and many others, and you begin to see how this extremely clever, sophisticated technology can sell things, can buy things, can influence people, and can change minds, and can create racism, can create fear, can create danger for people. We need to have some thinking about the way in which the small number of very big companies control so much of what our media is about. We need to get that message out there and give hope to people. We need to build a society that really is fit for the next generation. Because I'm frightened of young people growing up, over-tested and stressed in too many of our schools in too many countries, that are in debt because they have to go to college or university. Now going through a housing crisis where they pay more than ever for a rented flat, and the insecurity that comes with that. And then being told that the public services they thought they were going to have in health and so on are going to be disappearing because they're all going to be privatized, and they've got to make their way in a market economy. And those less able, those less achievable are not going to get any part of that. We've got to create a world of fairness and of justice. It's a big task, it's a big ask. Nobody ever did anything on their own, but it's the unity of people in all our campaigns, all our groups, all over the world, understanding where we've come from, the better to know where we're going to go. Thank you very much indeed.
Λοιπόν, 4 ερωτήσεις, 2 γυναίκες, 2 άντρες. Μία γυναίκα παρακαλώ. Έχουμε ένα χέρι εκεί πάνω, μπράβο. Έλα, με το μαύρο. Αργυρό, γεια σου Αργυρό.
Καλησπέρα σας. Ακούγομαι?
Ναι.
Καλησπέρα σας. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ που είστε εδώ, είναι τιμή μας. Θα ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω, η προοδευτική διεθνής του σήμερα, σε ποια θα θέλατε να μοιάσει περισσότερο, στην πρώτη, στη δεύτερη ή στην τρίτη του παρελθόντος?
Don't answer yet. Λοιπόν, ένας Αρσένη... εδώ, έχουμε και την νεολαία. Ο Θοδωρής.
Hello, it's a great honor to have you here tonight. Εγώ θέλω να κάνω μια ερώτηση παίρνοντας αφορμή το τελευταίο σκέλος της ομιλίας σας για τους νέους. Ως επικεφαλής των εργατικών καταφέρατε να κάνετε κάτι που δεν έχει γίνει στην Ελλάδα τα τελευταία 12 χρόνια, να ενεργοποιήσετε τα αντανακλαστικά των νέων και των νέων. Στην Ελλάδα, λόγω των μνημονίων, αυτό δεν γίνεται τα τελευταία 12 χρόνια. Πολλοί νέοι βλέπουν την πολιτική με κακό μάτι, την απεχθάνονται, απέχουν. Στην Αγγλία, τι καταφέρατε, πώς το καταφέρατε αυτό? Είναι λίγο παράδοξο να το ρωτάει ένας νεότερος σε έναν μεγαλύτερο, αλλά αφού δούλεψε στην Αγγλία, πείτε μας πώς το κάνετε, μπας και το βάλουμε και εδώ πέρα σε πρόγραμμα.
Να έρθω και από αυτή τη μεριά. Μία γυναίκα, γιατί από αυτή τη μεριά δεν είχα ξαναέρθει. Είχατε σηκώσει το χέρι πρώτη. Πάρτε το δικό μου. Εδώ, να το. Έτρεξε.
Καλησπέρα. Σε συνέχεια της ερώτησης του Θοδωρή, και αν κινητοποιήσατε τους νέους, τι συνέβη με αυτούς μετά? Τι συνέβη δηλαδή όταν κάποιος ψηφίζει και έχει ένα όραμα σαν το δικό σας και σας υποστηρίζει? Τι κάνει μετά με τον Τζόνσον? Φεύγει από την πολιτική, κοιμάται, θυμώνει? Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Και θα καταλήξουμε με τον... Θα μου επιτρέψετε να κάνω έτσι μία παραχώρηση στην ακαδημαϊκή κοινότητα με τον συνάδελφο Σεφεριάδη από την Πάντιο. Πρέπει να υπάρχει και λίγη αλληλεγγύη μεταξύ ημών των καθηγητών.
Can I put it in English? Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for your presence. Thanks for this joyful and inspiring, as Yannis said, contribution. And I also enjoyed very much your use of the term socialism. We don't hear it very often in Greece. There are reasons for it. It came out very naturally out of your mouth in the course of your presentation. I'd like to ask a couple of questions concerning the manifesto you presented earlier. I think it's very important, and I do sincerely hope that it will be received as it must by the international community. At the same time, however, I have a query concerning the people to which it is addressed. Who are the people who we expect to receive the message and act upon it? Although the description of the mechanics, the required mechanics for bringing about peace is impeccable. I mean, that's how things must carry on if we are to avoid another Afghanistan. Do we expect the governments of Europe to be convinced? Will they be persuaded, especially since, as you put it, you know, nowadays they're pretty much the mouthpiece of big interests, armed dealers, traders, and so on. Or is it instead that we should address this manifesto to the people in the hope of bringing about an international anti-war movement, pretty much along the lines of what you said about the processes that led to the establishment of political rights and so on? They were never given, they were won. So nowadays, I think that the challenge is to think of ways to bring about such a movement. And given the circumstances, the fact that we have such a deepening crisis of capitalism, perhaps link up this anti-war movement with the question of a transition to socialism. I think this is the drift of your contribution. So I would like to ask, what things do you think that must be done in order to bring about such a movement, which I think is required in the circumstances? Thank you.
Thank
The
you
floor
very
is
much
yours again.
for the questions, and thank you very much for the translation. And could I say before I finish, a huge thank you to the interpreters that have been so excellent throughout this evening and yesterday evening. It's not an easy job. It's a very tiring job, and I want to say thank you very much. And they've done it absolutely brilliantly and excellently. Of the 4 questions, the first one, the question of internationals. Yes, there was the first international, second international, third international, fourth international. I know them all because I'm a bit older than some people here. I've lived through some of them. And I've had all the debates and discussions about it. The Progressive International that we've established is not designed in that way to be an ideological international. It's designed to be a solidarity program and solidarity understanding. And that is why we've been working a lot with progressive movements around the world. I mentioned in my speech Indian farmers, also mentioned people in most parts of Latin America. We've also been working with people in South Africa and others in other parts of Africa, where we're giving support and space to those that are often going through very, very difficult struggles indeed, and trying to forge a unity between those struggles. And so we've only been going for a year and a bit, but it's very important work that we're doing. And the conference we're having at the moment is a largely online one, and it's named about the end of the earth. Originally, I think the thinking behind calling it the End of the Earth Conference was it was due to be held in Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, which is very much at the sort of southern end of the earth. And then it's not being held physically. It's now a virtual conference, and so it is a conference online. And Progressive International is designed to unite people and give people space. And Yanis pointed out, he and many others on a fairly broad spectrum of the left are part of it. I think it's very important to do that, to build that sense of unity. I've also done work with peace activists in Russia and other places as well, because we shouldn't recognize national borders when we're looking for peace. We shouldn't recognize national borders when we're looking for human rights or equality. On the questions that was raised about mobilizing youth and what happens to them afterwards, we fought the campaign up to the 2017 election on the basis that the fundamental mistakes were the austerity package that was introduced after the financial crash of 2008, which was devastating to public services, living standards, and so much else in every country that was affected by it. And it was the poorest working class communities that suffered the most. And it was young people that suffered the highest levels of unemployment and stress as a result of it. And successive governments had continually increased university charges up to as high as £9,000 per year, which is a huge amount. I personally have always voted against any tuition fees for universities. And what I wanted to do was introduce the concept into our manifesto that education should be a right in the same way that healthcare is a right, in the same way that human rights are clearly a set of rights. So the concept was universal education from cradle to grave, rather than the marketization of education, and as a result of that, the destruction of often the academic freedom in universities. But it wasn't just to the, 40-odd% of young people in my community that go to university. It was to the other 60% as well, about training opportunities and about the over-competitive nature of secondary school education, which means that the young people that are not going to get the top grades in all the subjects get gradually eased out, and they end up not achieving, becoming very angry, and becoming poorer as a result of it. The whole principle being the universality of education. But it was also an appeal particularly to very young children, preschool education as being, to me, some of the most important points of discrimination between the children of better off parents and the children of poorer parents. So it was the whole appeal of inclusivity. But it was also an appeal about the creative nature of people and life. Because young people are very creative and very imaginative. Young people enjoy music, enjoy art, and enjoy poetry. When they get sort of 10 or 11, they become slightly embarrassed if they're writing poetry, and unless somebody tells them their art is very good, they're a bit embarrassed about doing that, and a bit embarrassed about wanting to be actors and wanting to do all sorts of things. I wanted to turn this around and say, well, actually, this is fundamentally part of our life. You can't have bread unless you have roses as well. You can't have life unless you have music with it. And so I wanted and got into our manifesto a commitment that we would fund for every child in every school free music education, free acting education, and free art education as well. And pointed out that there is a benefit of that as well, a benefit of that in that imagination and science actually go together. One of our great poets in England, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and many others, was a great friend of a scientist called Humphrey Davy, and they would exchange poetry and discussions about how you develop electricity. They didn't see the compartment here of science and the compartment here of poetry. They saw it all as part of the human development and human process. And so we spent a lot of energy in that election campaign, and I did meetings and rallies all over the country, sometimes 6 a day, all over the country, with predominantly youthful audiences, and we persuaded many of them to vote, and many people endorsed our campaign, and they did take part and did vote. They were energized and politicized by that election campaign and the 2019 campaign. Your question is a very good one. What's happened to them now? Well, they haven't gone away. I keep getting stopped by people in their young 20s who tell me of heroic battles they're fighting in their unions or political party branches or whatever it happens to be, saying they were enthused by what we put forward of the ideas and the hope and the vision of what can be achieved, how you can bring about social justice, but you could only do it if you challenge the levels of inequality in our society. I remember Bernie Sanders saying once, America can afford anything. America can do it. But the one thing it can't do is afford education and the obscene levels of individual personal wealth that exist within the United States. So the last question is a very strong and very profound one. We've put forward this manifesto because we had a conference call a few weeks ago. Many people were on it, and we were discussing, global call, talking about the issues surrounding war and peace. It was done from the Project for Peace and Justice, which we set up after the last general election. And what we were saying in that conference call was what's missing from the whole discussion about Ukraine is peace. People say, well, you shouldn't talk about peace, there's a war going on. It's exactly the time to talk about peace is when a war is going on in order to bring about that peace for the future. And so we have put forward that manifesto. Of course it's an appeal to global leaders, of course it's that. But it's also, I hope, a basis on which we can mobilize a lot of people on that global call. The longer we delay on a ceasefire, the longer we delay on some kind of longer-term peace, the more money that's going to be wasted that could be spent on health and education and housing, the more people that are going to die under bombardment or because of medical emergencies in Ukraine, the more young Russian soldiers' bodies that are going to be taken back to Russia, the more the bitterness that's going to be there for generations to come. We have to act to bring about peace. We have to act to end the war. We have to bring about peace for the future. That is the only way, and your question is a very good one, because it is about how we mobilize people to achieve it. And I was very proud, and I'll finish on this, on that day, February the 15th, 2003, when we had that global day of action on Iraq. There were 600 demonstrations at the same time around the world. 600 demonstrations on every continent and pretty well every major city all around the world. Did it stop the Iraq war? No. Did it prevent some countries taking part in the Iraq war? Yes. Did it educate a lot of people as to the alternatives to war and the lies that were told in the build-up to the Iraq war? Yes, it absolutely did. Every generation has a turning point in their consciousness, and an awful lot's turning point came over the Iraq war. We have to make sure that we create the new turning point of peace and justice and hope for the future for this generation. Thank you very much indeed.
Ένα μεγάλο ευχαριστώ στον Τζέρεμι, την Έτζε, σε κάθε έναν και κάθε μία από εσάς. Μην ξεχνάτε, αύριο έχουμε μια ολόκληρη μέρα συζητήσεων και έχουμε και ένα πάρτι αύριο το βράδυ. Μην το ξεχνάτε.